as we transitioned from Division II to Division I, we were in a 5-year waiting period back there. Now it's only 4 to be able to qualify for postseason play. And so 2008, their senior year was going to be the first year that we were going to be able to qualify for a conference tournament and for the NCAA tournament. And so they came in with this idea, and they didn't leave. They didn't abandon ship. They stayed true to the course. And you could just see that team maturing little by little over the next few years. And by the time they were seniors in 2008, we had gotten into a conference. We were in the Summit League. We won the conference regular season. We won the conference tournament. We went to the second round of the NCAA tournament, the first time any team from that conference had ever done so. And it was a testament to this group of young women who stayed the course. And that was my first real, I guess, education and understanding how to build a culture.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people.
Coaches, I'm excited to welcome Lang Wedemeyer to the podcast. Lang is the head women's soccer coach at Liberty University. Prior to taking the helm at Liberty in 2017, Lang spent 17 years as the head coach at South Dakota State University, where he led them to 4 Summit League titles and 4 NCAA tournaments after starting the program from scratch. And he was also named Summit League Coach of the Year twice. In this episode, we talk about lessons learned from starting a program, developing your assistant coaches, building relationships with athletes, and more. If you enjoyed this episode and want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes in this episode or any episode. And if you're interested in learning more or getting access to our 2022 Summer Coaching Series, you can go to summercoachingseries.com to learn more or get access. And one note about this episode before we hop in. This conversation was recorded live at a coaching convention, so there may be a bit of background noise at times, but we did our best to edit the audio to bring you the highest quality possible. Now to my conversation with Lang Wedemeyer. Enjoy the episode.
Well, let's start off and talk about what you mentioned there with South Dakota State and starting that program from scratch. I can only imagine some of the challenges that came along with that, but I'm also guessing there were some really valuable lessons learned. So let's start with there. What was it like starting a program from scratch? What were some of the challenges that you faced, maybe some of the mistakes you made, and then some of the lessons learned?
Sure. Well, again, it was an exciting opportunity. I felt like there was just this, carte blanche, that there's just a clean slate to start things the way you wanted to start to create a program the way you wanted to. But I was also somewhat young and naive, and it didn't really. Probably the biggest mistake that I made, and again, after I kind of got through that first year, the next year we had a lot of success, and we were 5-12-1 my first year in 2000, and the next year we flipped that. We were 13-5-1, and in one season. And but the biggest mistake I made during that time is I was recruiting some pretty talented players from the area, but I wasn't recruiting character, and it came back to bite me. And so that was a valuable lesson that I learned during that time. But again, from a Division II standpoint in the Upper Midwest, starting a brand new program, there were just so many learning lessons. Again, I thought, and it was great to have that early success, but it also created a few false ideas about the direction we were going to go and how I needed to really form a program. I was thinking about building a team, not forming a program, and those two were very different. So that was, again, something that I had to learn the hard way. And really where it came down to was, a few years later when we made the move to Division I remember coming into a team meeting. It was going to be our last season as Division II, and they'd already made the announcement that we're going to go the next year. And some of these girls said, I said, we're going to move into Division I. I thought the team would be super excited, a different level of play and everything else. And one girl stood up and said, this isn't what I wanted. I didn't want a Division I school. I wanted a Division II school. So I don't know if I want to play anymore. I mean, she said that right in front of the whole team. And so you were like, wow, okay, my excitement of this move maybe is not going to be shared by all of these players. And so that was an epiphany moment for me, where I had to realize that not only do we have to recruit a different level of talent to compete at the Division I level, we had to recruit a different level of mindset. And but again, 2000, I would say that 2005 time. And I'll just share this last brief story because it's pretty important about the evolution of me as a coach and the programs that I've worked in. But that was my first real Division I recruiting class, as far as the talent of the players that we were bringing in. And when those girls came in 2005, we were starting. It was a pretty good, talented group of freshmen, and I was starting all of them. There were like 8 freshmen starting at that time, but they hated each other. And so that first, again, we didn't win a lot of games that first spring. They were very individualistic, and we had that first spring after they come in, we spent as much time in a classroom just getting to know each other and to start establishing what it meant to be selfless and a part of a program and to play for one another and to learn and know each other in a deeper level. And that team, to their credit, they knew as we moved from as we transitioned from Division II to Division I. We were in a 5-year waiting period back there. Now it's only 4 to be able to qualify for postseason play. And so 2008, their senior year, was going to be the first year that we were going to be able to qualify for a conference tournament and for the NCAA tournament. And so they came in with this idea, and they didn't leave. They didn't abandon ship. They stayed true to the course. And you could just see that team maturing little by little over the next few years. And by the time they were seniors in 2008, we had gotten into a conference. We were in the Summit League. We won the conference regular season. We won the conference tournament. We went to the second round of the NCAA tournament, the first time any team from that conference had ever done so. And it was a testament to this group of young women who stayed the course. And that was my first real, I guess, education and understanding how to build a culture. And so I've taken so many lessons from that early time there that I've been able to apply and adapt in these last years.
Well, thanks for sharing that story. It's really interesting. And good just to hear that and know that. You mentioned it in that answer, the difference between building a team and a program. And then at the end there, talking about that was really your first understanding of how essential it is to build a culture. Will you talk more about those things? What's the difference between building a team and a program? And then, I think kind of connected to that, how did you begin to build the culture that you actually wanted?
Well, sure. Again, I think that from a standpoint of building a team, and you see this at all levels. You'll see this at the club level. You'll see this at high school. You'll see it at college. You'll see it especially in the professional level a lot of times because of the tenuousness. The coaches aren't always going to be able to be there, right? They've got to produce and they've got to be able to win right away. And again, you'll see it. I think it's changing a little bit. I think culture has become a big buzzword, and everybody's, there are tons of culture sessions here in one way or another at the convention, which is awesome. And so people are starting to understand this. But there's a lot about, okay, how do we win today? What do I need to do to win today? You'll see it with a lot of college basketball programs where they'll recruit junior college kids, or they'll bring in the one and dones, and and so they are. That was my idea. Is like, how do I win today? I'm just going to recruit the best kid today, and regardless of her character, her moral standing, whether we would get along, her coachability, any of those types of things. If she's good and she can score a goal or two for us and we're going to win, that player is going to be on my team. And then I'll figure out the rest later. I'll try to make her into a better person, a better player, someone who is team first. And that doesn't always work. It does sometimes, but not always. So that was, again, those were hard lessons learned, that if you wanted to build a program with sustained success where you can win year after year after year, you had to put some things in place. You had to, so that led me to creating my first mission statement, my first vision statement, core values for the program. How are we going to deliver these core values? And you talk about the culture. That's the essence of a culture. Is what are going to be those non-negotiables that we're going to come back to every year, no matter who's transferring through who's matriculating through your program as seniors graduate and leave and new freshmen come in. This is who we are. And now we're bringing players in and educating them on a very consistent way. And that's how you build that culture.
Yeah, I like that you highlighted that there, just the importance of those core values. Will you talk more about how you guys tried to bring those to life? Because, it's easy to list out some words and have some core values, but it's a lot harder to stay connected to that purpose and those values in the heat of athletic practice and competition, and really to make sure that they show up as behaviors.
Right.
How did you guys do that?
Right. Well, I think that's something that's always it's a work in progress. Culture is a living, breathing entity that you have to, again, the core foundation of it, you don't want to really change. I mean, again, it may get tweaked a little bit as you grow and mature and the program changes and becomes more successful, hopefully, than some of that. But again, matures, evolves, but that core stays the same. And so something that has to be worked on, it has to be evaluated, has to be continued to be taught. For us, where it started with me was reading some books by John Wooden and what he had done at UCLA. And certainly I think a lot of coaches will fall back on someone like that. Although I never met the man while he was alive, I certainly valued a lot of what I read from what he was doing in his coaching tenure. And so we built our own pyramid of success, based on his. And then but you have to bring it, you have to bring it to life. You have to bring something that's tangible. And so we actually, I bought a whole bunch of Legos, those big the big Legos, the ones for the 3-year-olds. And we had each girl create her own pyramid. And they actually wrote, the core values of that time, which was way too many. But, again, this was the process. And so they each had their own pyramid. And so, that was a way of being able to give them something tangible. They could sit on their desk in their room. It could be by their nightstand, whatever it was, as a way of saying, this is who we are. And so that eventually led to, now I have 4 core values, which is a lot easier to manage. For my program right now, it's love, courage, grit, and accountability. And so pretty much every practice, every team meeting, we are bringing up one of those core values in what we call a culture session. And so sometimes, again, at Liberty, it's a Christian university, so we can talk about our faith. But that's the foundation of who we are and what we want to be and what we aspire to. But we also talk, we bring in these core values in different ways. We talk about what it means to really love the game or love your teammates, love playing, and if you really do those things, doing a passing activity that seems pretty boring takes on a different meaning now. And so we're always reconnecting those core values back to the mundane, to the daily things that they're doing and putting them in front of them, because they won't make that connection all the time until maybe they've been in it for a while and those seniors are doing it. So it's little things like that. We read books every semester. And so like John Gordon's one of my favorite authors, so we'll do a ton of his stuff. And so we'll and so much of his stuff you can tie right back to a lot of those core values. So all of those types of things are ways that we do it to try to help that culture continue to stay alive and growing.
I love what you talked about there with culture sessions. And I'm curious to learn a little bit more about those. But before I ask that, I just think it's important to recognize that you are intentionally taking the time to do it, to have the conversations, to, I'm guessing, highlight when someone lives it out, where you've seen it, maybe where you've seen them fall short, and how we can change that going forward. I'm curious about maybe some of the logistics of that. Are those, I think you said it was around 10 minutes. Are those in the classroom before practice? Is it on the field before practice? Is it after practice? When and how are you conducting those?
Sure. So again, those culture sessions, a lot of times in preseason, we actually carve out very specific classroom times for them or some type of team bonding activity where we start to highlight that stuff. Once we get into the heat of the season, we become really busy. It's 5 minutes, it's 10 minutes, it's 15 maybe. We try not to go beyond that. It's usually at the end of a practice, so they leave with something that connects what they were doing on the field to the rest of their day or, into tomorrow's training or the game or whatever it may be. Another thing that we do, which you alluded to, was at the end of practice, we often do what we call spotlights. And so we have girls, they actually do it themselves. We say, all right, tell us a spotlight. And most of the time it'll be something, this person was, awesome around the goal today. She gave a great effort today. I loved how she, back tackled and, whatever that may be. And then we come back and we connected back to one of our core values. Well, you talked about how hard she played today and how she was throwing her body in front of every shot. Like, that's grit. And this is the standard of grit that we expect from everybody, right? So we're always trying to find ways that they can make those connections back to the actions of what they're doing and how that is lived out through the core values.
That's fantastic. And I make a habit of doing something similar with my teams. We call them celebrations, but it's the same thing. It's just, hey, at the end of practice, we're going to take 90 seconds, 2 minutes to recognize each other for living out our identity or our core values here. And, as the coach, to do that, to do that to them, but then also, like you said, to give them a chance to do it for each other is so powerful, and it's so connecting. And the reality of it too, I think part of the reason it's so powerful is all of us as people, we have narratives in our mind that often are not true, and we're often our own worst critic, and we often think other people see us the way we see ourselves. And so to hear from your peer how they see you and to be recognized by them for something that you're bringing, that's just really special.
Yeah.
And we all want that. We all crave it. As coaches, players, wherever you are, we all want to be seen and valued for the contribution that we're making.
Sure.
And to have those spotlights or celebrations focus on things that are connected to our core values, our identity. It's not about so-and-so scored the goal, but it's about so-and-so that made the unselfish run that created the goal. Right. And to really bring those things to life and to highlight those for athletes is so powerful and hopefully serves them throughout the rest of their life.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think that, one of the biggest selling points that we have in our recruiting process is that we're in the business of holistically developing our student athletes. We are very competitive. We want to be competitive. We want to win games. We want to win championships. But ultimately, our greatest success is preparing them for life after college. To be great doctors, nurses, engineers, moms, wives, educators, whatever path that they end up going down, that we've prepared them for that through their time with us.
Yeah, I love that. I'm curious, we've talked about the culture piece for a little while here, but during your time at South Dakota State, those 17 years and a lot of sustained success, what were some of the other keys to sustaining that success year over year?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that, one, that time with those girls that I alluded to at the beginning of the podcast, that 2005 recruiting class that ended up going to the NCAA tournament, winning in 2008, or winning the first round game in 2008. They set a tone and really created a belief for the people that came after them. Like, we can do this. Like, we could, I will say, even for my own self, when we found out we were going to be moving to Division I, there was a lot of excitement, but there was also a lot of trepidation. There was a lot of fear. There was a lot of doubt. There was like, how can we compete at Division I? We're in South Dakota, for Pete's sake. I mean, where are our recruits going to come from, and how are we going to do this? And I think a lot of people shared that sentiment. All across the board, from all the sports and even the fans and the people who have been diehard Jackrabbit fans forever. So there was a lot of unknown that went into it. And when we had that success in 2008, it's kind of like Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile. It was like, we can do this. And I think that set a tone and a precedent and an expectation for every class that ever came after that. And the continuity, I would say, again, the coach that's there now, Brock Thompson's done an amazing job. He came in as my assistant in that 2008 year. So he lived through that. Now, he didn't see the maturation of that group, but he saw the results of that maturation. And he fell into that level of belief and understanding. And we worked together for 8 or 9 years before I left. And again, I think that was a big part of it. And of course, you've got recruiting, you've got continued development, you've got all of those other pieces that allow you to do that sustained success. But it started with that group.
Yeah, it totally makes sense there. And I'm curious, actually. Brock, you said, is he was with you for 8 years before you left and he took over, correct?
Right. Uh-huh.
I'd be really curious to know, what were some of the ways that you were intentional as the head coach to develop him and prepare him to eventually take over that program?
Sure. I think that probably the biggest part was that I learned to be more vulnerable and be able to admit the mistakes that I had made or even was making. That I was able to come to someone that I really trusted and was able to say, okay, my gut's telling me this, or this is where my intentions are. What do you think? And he was, again, as we established a stronger and stronger relationship, he was able to come back and say, no, I don't think that's a good idea. Like you're not this is, you're just angry about this, or you're upset about this, or the last game you're thinking you're thinking in the wrong direction right now. And that would make me even madder. I'm like, no, I want to do this. We're going to change the lineup and I'm going to kick this person out, and he's like, no, just settle down. And he was able to speak into me that way. And inevitably, those conversations, even though I at times was looking for validation for how I was feeling or the perspective I had on the team, he was able to counterbalance that a little bit. And then I did the same thing for him at times. And I think that great continuity grew in a strong friendship, but also a level of trust. And then I think that the more and more that he saw, and again, I would say that my maturation of a coach continued to grow, but he was a part of that. He saw it, whether that was through my mentors that I was bringing back and educating him vicariously through what I was learning through the NSCA and the people I was working with, and so I think that was all preparing him for that moment to take over and really take the program forward.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked that question, because it's not necessarily the response I expected and not necessarily the response I think most people would give, but I totally see what you're saying there. Just the power and importance of you being willing to be vulnerable as the head coach and ask for feedback, to listen to his feedback, how important that was in his development as an assistant. And I'm guessing that he's doing the same thing that you modeled when you were there. And I think that's something that any coach, especially a head coach, can take and apply. Just being willing to be honest and vulnerable with the other coaches and say, I'm struggling with this. This didn't go well. And ask for that honest feedback. And at first, and maybe this is the case with you guys, they may not really give you the honest feedback. There may not be the trust there and the relationship there to really get the honest feedback. But I think it's so important that you stay with it, build that relationship, and get to a place where you can be really honest with each other about the feedback, even the hard and uncomfortable things. Like you said, he started telling you things that you did not want to hear.
Right.
But I think it's so important that as leaders, we have that. We have someone that is willing to tell us things that are uncomfortable, that we might not want to hear. And I think you mentioned it too, just to kind of expose some blind spots that we might have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Again, and I think that in our time together, it really educated me on how important the role of the assistant coach is, not just for a delegation, but as a sounding board. And there are those days that I still have a hard time hearing that information, but I know how important it can be.
Yeah, totally. I want to shift a little bit and talk about your experience with and your thoughts on the importance of work-life balance for coaches. Coaching is such a demanding profession from a time standpoint, an emotional standpoint, a relational standpoint. And unfortunately, I think this is an area where most coaches struggle balancing coaching with their family and their relationships. Talk to me about your journey with that and your thoughts on it.
Sure. Well, I really think that in the beginning, as I talked about, when I finally broke into the college ranks as a head coach, and I had visions of grandeur. I was gonna be at South Dakota State for 3 or 4 or 5 years. I was gonna establish a program there. I was gonna move on to something bigger and better. Eventually be in the ACC or SEC and winning national championships and probably the same visions that many coaches have at the beginning of their careers. And for me, really, the wake up call was having my first child. And it was like, okay, maybe I've got to rethink things a little bit here. Staying up all night with a crying baby or changing diapers really puts life in perspective sometimes. And and I just thought about. I mean, I had a wonderful dad. He's still alive, and we have a great relationship. But growing up, he was a salesman, and he was on the road all the time. And he didn't miss a soccer game very often. But there wasn't a day-to-day connection. He never coached me in anything. There wasn't a lot of that time where we were just together. We just didn't have many things in common. Although, again, he was very supportive and a great provider until much later in life, maybe after high school, we really connected in a deeper level. But that always affected me, and I didn't want to be that way for my children. I didn't want to be an absentee father for the children that I had and I alluded to this in the panel discussion we had on Thursday that, the people I was looking up to at the time were people like Bill Belichick, at the Patriots having all this success, and I'm reading about him and he's going in the office at 5 a.m. He's not leaving until midnight and they're winning Super Bowls. And I'm like, okay, well, that's the way it's done. And, that was my mentality. And then I just realized that I wanted more out of life than that. I mean, I wanted to win and I still do. I'm ultra competitive, but I want to win the right way, but I don't want to sacrifice my family along the way. And so there's been some give and take. Again, I've got an extremely understanding wife, which is a must have for a coach. And the reverse side too, if you're a female coach and having an understanding, husband, but she's very understanding. We've got 4 kids, but I've tried to make sure that I've coached all of them in soccer at some level, whether it was recreation or club or travel. I'm still coaching 2 of them to this day. But I was also trying to build a career. And so I was doing ODP. I was on the regional staff. I was traveling all the time. I was instructional staff member with the NSCA, now United Soccer Coaches. And I was doing coaching education stuff in the state of South Dakota and Virginia. So I was trying to do things to not only honor God's calling for me as a coach, but to build my career, to build my resume so that I was more marketable. And when the opportunity came potentially for me to be somewhere else, that I was prime for that and I had the experience and knowledge to do it. And so it was tough. I would say the biggest advice that I gave most of the coaches is that you're just going to have seasons. The fall season in college soccer is really hard. You're traveling, you've got training every day. There's recruiting on top of it. And that's just a harder time to you can't go on vacation at that time with the family, and my wife and my kids, they know that. But then there's that December dead period. And now we make sure we get away during that time and we spend a lot of time with the family and we don't worry about the recruiting. And I don't work, I work from home, for a few hours and then I spend time with the kids. So there's seasons, through the course of every year. And as the more you go through it, you understand. But you've got to put first things first. And the acronym that I used in the panel was WIN, W-I-N, what's important now. And so I have to always come back to that. And there are certain days that I certainly make mistakes, but I come back to that often as like, okay, what's most important now? Sometimes I've got to, what's most important is I got to get on the phone with a recruit and I can't, go play ping pong with my son. But then there are other times where I've got to just shut the computer and I've got to get home because we're going to have dinner as a family. And I've got to leave the work for tomorrow. And that's really hard to do sometimes. And again, I still make mistakes, but I try to keep that in front of me as much as possible.
Totally. And I like what you talked about there at the end with that WIN, just that question, what's important now? What matters? Where should my attention and focus be? I'm curious, have there been any practical things that you have done or do to kind of establish those boundaries and make it easier or more likely that you can focus on what's important now?
Again, it's ever evolving, maturing, changing, adapting to whatever the situation may be. Probably the two most difficult things, you didn't ask this question, but it leads me into the answer. The two most difficult things are the things you don't expect. You've cleared your calendar, you've finished up that last email for the day, and all of a sudden something pops up and says, oh, by the way, you've got to redo your CPR and you got to finish this by tomorrow, and it's going to take 3 hours. And you're like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? It's things like that get put on you. It's part of being a college coach, but those are really difficult. The second thing that I would say is really difficult is one of the things that I struggle mightily with is this level of guilt when I'm doing something and my mind takes me to where it thinks I should be. So for instance, I love to run, and not all the time, but there are a lot of times I'll be out for a run and I want to make it a long run, but in the back of my mind, like, oh, you've got this to do, you've got that to do, you got to call that recruit, you got to prep for practice, you got to meet with that player, you got to set up this, you got to, and it's like, you better get to the office. You don't have time to do this. You got to go. Or I'm at the office and that nagging that you got to get home, you got to go do this. And that you still have work to do. It's got to be finished. There's a time limit on whatever you're working on, and it's got to be finished. And so that little level of that voice of guilt is kind of always there, and it's learning how to quiet it. I think that's one of the things that I've tried really hard to try to do. And some of that for me has come through prayer. Some of that has come through what I put pictures of my family up all through my office. And I'm always trying to, that's a great reminder, like what's most important right now. But there's also a picture of an NCAA ball on my desk as well. So like, I want to go to the tournament. I want to I want to compete. I want to win championships. I got pictures of our, championship trophies right there. I mean, so it's trying to balance those two things as best as possible. And just putting those reminders to bring you back to being present and figuring out what's most important.
Yeah, that's so good. I've got one more question for you, and then a few rapid fire questions. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, 17 years at South Dakota State, 5 years at Liberty now. And you've mentioned a few times that recruiting is a big piece of what you do. And so much of what we do as coaches is relationships, building those relationships. But I'm really curious, what have you found to be the most effective, or maybe how have you had to change and grow in the way that you are connecting with and building relationships with this generation of athletes?
Well, how much time do we have? That's a loaded question. I think that it is a struggle for me because I am still a bit old school in the sense that, I grew up with, yes, sir, no, ma'am, thank you, please. If I walked into my house and there was somebody visiting my parents and I didn't immediately come into the room and shake that person's hand and introduce myself or ask them how they were doing, like I heard it from my mom after that. When you went to practice, there was never asking the coach, and why are we doing this? There was a trust, like that he knows best, and this is what we have to do to be a winner. And I'm going to give you my best right today, And so I definitely struggle at times, and I'm continuing to try to always educate myself on how do I best reach this generation, as you talked about. And there's no really easy answer, but I think the key to it, and you've already alluded to this, relationships. And just trying to spend that time getting to know the young women that I coach on as deep a level as possible so that I can understand how to reach them the best way possible. That's really hard. We have we had 34 players on our team this year. I mean, that is a huge challenge. And part of that, you really rely on good assistants to fill those gaps. But there's no substitute for just spending time. There's no substitute for having a player come in your office and just talking about whatever. It doesn't even have to be soccer. One of the things we try to do within our program is we try to create the family atmosphere. And one of the things that we do, especially during the spring, it's a little limited in the fall, but every week we have 4, 5, 6 players over for dinner at my house. So my wife cooks for them. They get to be around my kids. They get a home cooked meal. My wife connects with them in a different way. And they feel like they've got, this kind of mother, father figure that's looking out for them, that cares about them beyond just, whether they're starting and playing and scoring goals. And I think that has been one of the most powerful tools that we've used, is just that constant ability to connect and communicate. And it is a huge challenge. The time that it requires and the intentionality that it requires. Sometimes I don't do a good job with it because I prioritize other stuff ahead of it. But it can never be stressed about how important it really is.
Thanks for being honest and sharing that it's hard and a struggle for you. And yeah, I know you're not alone in that. And I applaud you because obviously you're aware of it. That, that first step is becoming aware of it, that,
right.
This isn't what I'm used to. It does make me uncomfortable, but recognizing it's still important. I've got to be willing to change and grow here and evolve as a coach, right? I do the same thing I'm asking my players to do, to grow and embrace struggle. I've got to do that as well. Coach, this has been awesome. Before we wrap it up, I've got 3 quick rapid fire questions for you. I would love to just know the first thing that comes to your mind. The first one is this: the most fun part of coaching is?
I say that would probably be the relationships that you have with your players. I've coached guys, I've coached women. One of the things that's great about coaching women is that when you do connect with them and they build that level of trust and something positive happens, they will come back and they will thank you and they will recognize it. A guy always thinks it's just him. A guy will score a goal and he'll just, point to himself and point to the name on the back of his jersey. But a girl will look over you and say, thank you. Like, what you did with me in practice helped me score that goal. And that's obviously very gratifying. Not the only reason, but it's a piece of the puzzle of the relationship that's formed.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Here's the next one. I know. Oh, whoops, wrong order. Here's the next one. I wish I would have known blank before my first coaching experience.
The same thing that I just said, it was one of the most positive things, was understanding the difference between coaching men and women. And although I'd been coaching girls at a club level, there was a difference in coaching them at the college level, and I didn't attribute enough understanding to that. And really what happened to me after my first year at South Dakota State, I was sitting at a women's basketball game, and our women's basketball team has been incredible. They've won a Division II national championship at South Dakota State, and then they have a ton of success at the Division I level. But I was watching a game, and it hit me like, I want a team that's as successful as this basketball team. I want to be going to the NCAA tournament. I want to be winning championships and so forth. And again, it was a little of that light bulb going off. And at halftime, I ran into my office, and I had a bunch of books at the time, but I pulled out one of Anson Durance's books that he had written, and I just went through the bibliography, and I started writing down all of the ones where he talked about, things like men are from Mars, women are from Venus, anything that I could grasp on that started to talk about how do you reach, players of the opposite sex, and how do you understand them in a different way? And that took me a while to understand.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that as well. Here's the last one. I know I'm successful as a coach when
I get invited to weddings.
Yeah.
And that's been great lately. There was one at Thanksgiving, there was one on New Year's Day, got another one in March. But when a young woman invites you to your wedding, you know that you've made an impact on her life.
Yeah.
And that's pretty special.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode, and thanks to Coach Wedemeyer for joining me. As always, if you enjoyed the episode and you want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a detailed PDF of free notes. And Coach, if you enjoyed this episode or enjoyed the podcast in general, would you take a minute to either share this episode or the show with a coaching friend, or leave us a review on Apple or Spotify, and or give us a shout out on Twitter? Those things go a long way in helping us share with more coaches who then can impact more athletes. And coaches, don't forget to check out summercoachingseries.com to learn more or get access to the 2022 Summer Coaching Series. It's full of practical ideas that you can apply in your coaching. That's summercoachingseries.com. Thanks for listening to the podcast.